Well, there was a story about two boys who lived near a cemetery, and inside of the cemetery there was a pecan tree. Now, how many people here say pecan or pecan? What is right? Okay. I'm going to say pecan because that's just what I'm used to. But there's a pecan tree, and the boys jump the fence over the cemetery, and they are picking up the pecans, and they're saying, one for you, one for me, one for you, and one for me. And well, there was another little boy on his bike driving by the cemetery, and as he rode by, he heard voices in the cemetery, and he couldn't see anybody, and all he heard was one for you and one for me. And he got spooked. And he didn't know what to do, so he found this elderly gentleman with a cane walking down the street very slowly, and he says, Sir, you have to come. I think the Lord and the devil are in the cemetery. And the guy says, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, well, come and listen. And he's like, boy, I don't need to go over. He's like, the Lord and the devil are over there, and they're fighting over the souls of people. And so the old man hobbles over to the fence with the boy, and sure enough, the old man hears, one for you and one for me. And he says to the little boy, you were right. The Lord and the devil are in there fighting for the souls of everybody. And then all of a sudden, as they were quiet, they heard the voices. And they said, one for you and one for me. Well, I think that's all for right here. Now let's go get those two nuts by the fence. And hearing that, the old man tripped the boy and took off. So, but I don't care who you are, that would spook you if you thought you heard the devil and God fighting over your soul. This morning we are going to start the series on this book, 12 Ordinary Men, and talk about the 12 disciples. And I'd like to read to you out of the 3rd chapter of Mark, starting in the 13th verse, and you can read along with me on the screen. Starting in verse 13, it says, Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, to them he gave the name I can't pronounce, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So, those are a list of the 12 disciples. And today we'll have a little bit of an introduction and where I hope that we will go. And starting next week, we will have the series and talk about the disciples. Next week we'll start with Peter and we'll go on from there. But it's interesting to note that especially in verse 13 it says, Then he went up on the mountain and summoned those he wanted, and they came to him. It's interesting to note that these disciples were invited. They have the special invitation from Christ that said, I want you to be part of something. I want you to come and I want you to follow me because you are called. And you heard the call to worship this morning, that we are all called. And one of the things that I hope that we can understand through this series is that we can find ourselves in one or more of these disciples. The point of this series is to say, Jesus called these 12, and where am I in that picture? How do I see myself and my calling and my gifts for God? So hopefully we will talk about that. But he said, come, you are called. And it's interesting to note the people that Christ called. He didn't call any religious scholars. He didn't really call anybody on their ability because they were the best at something. He didn't really call on anybody because he had favorites. He called people who he could use. He called people to be obedient and to follow them. And it raised a lot of eyebrows. Jesus was always questioned, especially by the religious leaders, for the company that he kept. Why are you hanging around these people? Why are you hanging around tax collectors and this and that and people who are not Jewish and all of these questions? And there's a great book out I read it years ago. It's a Christian fiction book, and it's called Eli. And the premise of the book is, what if Jesus wasn't born in the first century? What if Jesus was born today in this generation? And in the book, it said Jesus was born during Woodstock, okay, in the back of a laundromat. And the whole book was about how we would respond to Christ today, and would it be any different than it was in the first century? But a good part of the book was the disciples that Christ called. And he called the people that we would keep outside of this church. He called the people that we think are the sinners, that are not living right, that have a lot of issues. And no different than the first century, where Christ called the people who other people thought were not worthy. And he said, "Come. I want you to have a greater intimacy with me and with God. I want to help you understand God on a deeper level." And it's something that Christ couldn't do to the multitudes. You know, I don't know if you've ever been in a large group, but it's a lot harder for me to explain deep things to 200 of you than it is if we sat down in a group of 10 or 12 in a small group where we can be a little more intimate and ask questions and have an understanding. So Christ had this philosophy to say, "Come be a part of this. Let me help you understand what I am teaching, so that you in turn can go out and share this message with other people." Because I'm sure if you're like me and you're in a group, and I'm sure every Sunday after I'm done preaching, there are 200 ideas of what I said. Well, I heard John say this. Well, I heard John say this. Well, I heard John, he didn't make any sense at all. You know, but if we had a smaller group, we would be able to say, "No, this was the meaning." So Christ said, "Come, have closer contact. Let me build a relationship so that you can go out and you can build relationships too." And they heeded this call. And I think one of the only criteria that Christ was looking for was somebody willing to follow, willing to say, "Christ is my teacher, my rabbi. Christ is the incarnation of the character of God, and I'm going to follow and be obedient to that." So they came. And then verse 14 and 15 says, "He also appointed the 12, and he named them apostles to be with him, to send them out to preach and have authority to drive out demons." Again, they had this divine appointment. Christ says, "You have a job to do. And I'm calling you apostles," which means those who are sent. So I am sending you out. Now, this might be a little intimidating to a lot of us, because some of us want a faith that just makes us comfortable, wants a faith that I can sit in a church pew with little or no commitment to actually having to go out and do anything. And Christ is saying right from the start, he's naming them apostles so that they don't have any question of what they are supposed to do. I am naming you an apostle because you have a job, and your job is to go out. Your job is for me to send you so that you can bring other people closer to God like you are. We are called. It means, though, we have to do something. It means sometimes we have to get our hands dirty and go and talk to people. It means that we have to live out our faith in a way that draws people in to God, into this special calling and this contact with Christ. We are, Paul talks about how we are ambassadors of Christ, that we represent Christ and God everywhere we go. We cannot divorce ourselves from that once we are Christian. So we are to go out and preach this message. And then I thought a lot about that last part that says he gave them power to drive out demons. Now, that's a term that we don't use that much anymore. I don't send you out of here every Sunday and go, "Now go drive out some demons." And I don't know about you, but I don't really want to come into contact with a real demon, especially after watching The Exorcist. I don't want to be thrown up on, because then the exorcism is over. But we can. Let me tell you, we can drive out demons. Now, it may not be the Hollywood version of somebody who is, has a demon inside them and we're going to have this exorcism, but we have the power as followers of Christ to help people with the demons in their life. We all have demons. We all have those things in our life that we struggle with. We all have those moments where we lose hope and we kind of lose track of God. But we have the power to drive out the demons in our own life, but we are sent out so that we can help people understand that they have the power and the hope and the love to deal with the demons that they have. Now, they may look different for everybody, but we carry that power within us. It has not changed from the first century. It hasn't changed from the first calling of the disciples that God says, go out and drive out demons. Again, the terminology may be different, but we have that power. We have the ability to show people what hope looks like. This past week, Amanda and I watched a movie. It was a strange movie. Okay, it was called The Skeleton Twins. And it was about a brother and a sister who grew up in this broken home with some mental illness. The father committed suicide, and it was about how they as adults could never quite get a grasp on what they were supposed to do, and they have had attempted suicide attempts that never worked. But one of the things that spoke to me about the message of the movie was that towards the end, the sister tried once again to commit suicide, okay, by drowning herself in a pool. And it leads you up to believe that the scuba instructor part of the movie was going to jump in and save her. But then out of nowhere, her brother jumps into the pool and pulls her out of the water. And the message for me, okay, was that one of the demons that they were battling, one of the demons that a lot of people battle, is that they have lost hope. That they don't think that there was any reason to continue, that they thought they were alone and they thought they were worthless. So in this movie, the brother jumped in, even as flawed and as broken as he was, and lifted this person out. And they understood that they weren't alone anymore, that they could battle these demons together, that they were loved and there was hope. Now, there wasn't a Christian message to the movie, okay? I'm reading into that. But that is what we are called to do. When people are drowning, we jump in and we help them understand that there is somebody here to help pull them out. And then we have a faith that says when we are drowning, that other apostles and believers are going to be able to help pull us out so that we know that we are worth something and that we are loved and we have hope. That, my friends, in my opinion, is how we can drive out demons today, to help people grab that hope that has been misplaced and to know that they are loved and they can be liberated by the bondage that we are in. And we are called to do that. That is the power that Christ gives to us, the power to change people, the power to transform our lives in such a way that we can be the apostles and go out and help other people transform their lives. Then he starts to talk in verses 16 through 19, where he appoints the 12 and he names them. And once again, we get this idea that Jesus called a diverse group of people. People who maybe Jesus shouldn't have been talking about, but it didn't matter to Christ. He says that God is going to do a work in you, and it doesn't really matter what you did in the past. It doesn't really matter where you came from. All that matters is that you have a willing heart. And it shows us this power of the God that says, God, am going to make you be the best person you can be. To be who you are supposed to be and called to be. And it doesn't matter if you are the top theologian or the top person at your work, a CEO, or somebody who is searching for meaning in your life. And all the places in between, God says, I call you. Even somebody who was going to betray Christ. And to me, this is one of the key parts of the book, because it's easy for us to get into a mindset that we are not worth anything, that we are not up to the task. Well, why is God calling me? I can't do this. Look at me, I mess up. Look at me, I have these issues. Why is God calling me to do this? And the 12 disciples is an example to me that God is going to call people in spite of themselves, in spite of my shortcomings, in spite of the hang-ups that I have. God says, John, I'm going to use you. John, you are worth something. And part of this journey of faith is understanding this and having this journey of discovery to understand who you are in the eyes of God. And once I know who I am and that I am worth something, we can hold our head up high and go and let other people know that they are worth God as well. But again, I don't have the talents. I don't have the abilities. And there's a cliche saying out there, okay? And I don't really like cliche sayings, but this one works. It says that God does not call the equipped, God equips the called. Now, think about that for a moment. In other words, that means God's going to show up and say, John, go do this, even if I don't know what I'm doing. Because God will give me the power and equip me to do the task that is before me, which may be something as simple as just going to help somebody. Whatever it may be, God says, you are called. You are worth this. You play a role in the kingdom that is being built. And if you go on in that verse, it talks about how Jesus changed some names of the disciples, especially Simon. He says, Simon, now you will be called Peter, which means the rock. And then he gave nicknames to James and all of James and John. And it wasn't so much that Jesus was giving them nicknames just to say, well, I just want to call you, buddy or whatever it is. Okay? These names show us that God says you are more than who you think you are. You are more than you give yourself credit for. I am going to help you understand who your true self can be. It's a discovery to develop your gifts and how you can use them. This transformation to say, yes, John, I'm going to use you in spite of who you are. I'm going to use you because you can reach some people that other people can't. I'm going to use you even if you don't think you are qualified because I know what you are capable of. I know the power that I have blessed you with, the gifts that you have. We're going to watch this transformation take place. It's a humbling thing to know that God, the Creator, looks at you and says, you are worth it and you can do it. I don't know about you, but I'm sure there are people in your life that it meant something more to you when they told you you can do it than somebody else. That somebody believed in you, you were able to step up to the plate a little bit and say, I have some faith behind me and somebody is believing and supporting me, and so I can do that. And again, part of the new names that we have, okay, obviously Jesus hasn't showed up to me and said, John, here's your new name, okay? But we do. We can call ourselves. I've shared this story probably multiple times, but I'll share it again because it's always a reminder to me that little things matter. When we went to Skid Row, I told you that story about there was first of all, I was very uncomfortable because I was outside of my comfort zones at Skid Row. And Skid Row is in Los Angeles. It's where all the homeless people live, literally in cardboard boxes like you see on television. And we were there just to go and talk to people. And I remember there was a family, a husband and a wife and one child sitting on the curb. They looked like they just wanted to crawl into the gutter and not come out. And I didn't know what to do. I just sat down next to him and reached out my hand and shook his hand. And the guy started crying, which already I was uncomfortable. Now throw in a guy crying, I was ready just to walk away. But it reminded me, because the guy said, you don't understand when the last time somebody reached out to touch me was. Because people just saw him as this homeless guy, not worth anything. Now, it did not take any effort for me to shake the guy's hand, even if I was uncomfortable. But it's a reminder that these little things, the way that we can show God to people, they're not giant, grand gestures all of the time. It's just enough to let people know that they are worth something and that they are not forgotten, that we see them. And if we can instill a little bit of that, that, my friends, is what it means to be an apostle of Christ, to be a disciple, to understand the calling on our life, to say, come, you are worth something. And I know that because God picked me out of the gutter too. So as we journey through with these disciples, I pray that you can find yourselves in some of them to know where God has placed a call upon your life. And know this, it is okay if your calling is different than somebody else's calling. You do not have to be the person sitting next to you or in front of you. You do not have to be somebody that you look up to all of the time, and say, well, so-and-so prays for 4 hours a day and I just wish I had the faith for them. It doesn't work like that. God knows who you are. So be authentic and your faith will speak volumes. So let us pray. Lord, I pray that as we journey through the next 10 weeks here and talk about these disciples and the personalities that they have, that we can see ourselves reflected in them. But Lord, help us to start right at the beginning, to know that we are called, to know that you have sent out an invitation to us to follow, that we are followers of Christ, and that means something. So as we understand who we are, help us to understand the power that gives to us so that we can go out and we can let other people know that they are called. And we can, Lord, even as crazy as it sounds, cast out demons when we are following you. So wherever we may find ourselves this morning, whether we feel we are worthless or whether we know we are worth something, help us to find out our gifts and then go out and be who you are calling us to be. And all of God's people said, allow me to leave you with these 2 paragraphs. The apostles' relatively brief time of training with Jesus bore eternal fruit. At first, it might have seemed that everything would be for naught. The night Jesus was betrayed, they were scattered like sheep whose shepherd had been smitten. Even after the resurrection, they seemed timid, full of remorse over their failures, and too aware of their own weaknesses to minister with confidence. But after Jesus ascended to heaven, the Holy Spirit came and infused them with power and enabled them to do what Christ had trained them to do. Those men, through the legacy of New Testament scripture and the testimony they left, are still changing the world today. And the author here says, if Christ can accomplish his purposes through the lives of these common men, imagine what God can do through us. So as we go on this journey, may we understand that we are called. And all of God's people said,